Welcome back to Discussion-Based Teaching Explained, a channel dedicated to discussion-based classrooms on which I will explore how to teach and learn in a discussion-based environment. I'm Adam, I'm a teacher, and I've been developing a discussion-based teaching practice now for 18 years, and though it's still very much a work in progress, on this channel I hope to share some beliefs and practices that I've found successful over the years. Before I get into today's episode, let's take a look at where we've been. Now this video series is turning towards discussion-based skill building exercises. I wanted to focus on two early, simple practices which are really important to my students' experience in my discussion-based class. The first is AAA discussion notes, which I covered last time. In this episode, I'm going to explore the second of those two foundational practices, the 3 levels of questions. So remember, discussion-based classrooms are about inquisition. Just like every other skill in a discussion-based classroom, we discussion-based teachers have to teach inquiry. Eventually, we want students to create questions naturally, instinctively. Using the levels of questions approach is successful because it's easy to explain to students. It's easy to deploy for students. It offers students the chance to think deliberately about what we're talking about. It offers students connection to the content, and it offers students a valuable reference point when they reflect back on discussions. Simply put, levels of questions not only influence what happens in the classroom, but I hope influence the way students think. So let's get into the 3 levels of questions. Level 1 questions are formulated to elicit explicit answers that are very clear in the text. The way I explain it is that if someone asks a level 1 question, everyone should be able to actually literally put their finger on the word or area in the text. Level 1 questions could be a fact or a date or who said something or what does a word mean. And naturally, some of you are probably thinking, well, wait, Adam, if everyone should have the answer, then what's the point of a level 1 question? In theory, you're right. But as I think we all know, just because something was supposed to be read and understood doesn't mean it was, right? Level 1 questions are simply a way for discussants to make sure they understood, to check their meaning, to kind of clarify nuance. Everyone understands that everyone tried to do the work, and that any level 1 questions that are launched aren't coming from teammates who were kind of flaky, but rather teammates who put in the effort and have legitimate questions. Doing a little work with level 1 before we get to the real discussion will really make for a better discussion. So at the beginning of the year, I'll explain what level 1 time is and we'll go into it. But towards the middle and the end of the year, they'll request that level 1 time. As a warning though, I would say that if too many of your assignments are requiring too much level 1 time, you might need to reflect on how difficult these assignments are. And simply put, if there's a ton of level 1 time that's necessary, then that's a red flag. So I guess if you find that the level 1 time is taking a lot longer than you might have thought, then, but you've also checked it and you think it's pretty reasonable, so you're not sure what's going on, it seems pretty clear you've probably got some homework compliance issues. I think if you find yourself in this situation, it might be time for you to consider quiz time. I mean, my students are super busy, and I'm sure a lot of yours are too. So essentially, I think getting them to prepare for a quiz will, motivate them. Obviously, the best case scenario is everyone does the work, everyone's ready with level 1. The second best scenario is those that haven't done it are at least honest about it. And the worst case scenario is a bunch of students having not done the work, or even one student not having done the work, not admitting it and trying to BS their way through discussion. It just gets really tricky over here because what's happening over here is you don't really want to embarrass this student, but the other students don't know whether you know that this student is BSing. So your authenticity is kind of blown, and this student doesn't know that you know, but you do know. So you end up kind of with this weird thing with that student, and they're looking at, it's just to be avoided. And honestly, the 2 ways to avoid that, or at least minimize it, is 1, as I said, make the homework reasonable and doable. But maybe a close second in importance is make the admission of lack of compliance reasonable. In other words, it's ideal for the discussion-based teacher to create an environment in which a student, if they're unable to get the work done, will tell us beforehand. And they're basically telling you and maybe eventually the team, hey guys, sorry, I kind of dropped the ball. today. I'll support the discussion. I'll try to do what I can. And what that does, it completely establishes their credibility. It respects the team. It creates a space where other students can do that. That is a super healthy scenario. Really, what we want is to create a space where students are able to do that. They really need to have this emphasized. This has to do with grading. They can't be punished too much for not doing the work. They can't be punished for doing a little bit late. I think what we're doing here is we're looking at values. There's a value in doing the work on time. The more important value I think that we're trying to teach is admission, or kind of owning your shortcomings. That's a huge value. I think it supersedes the value of getting everything done on time. And usually what you're going to get is students every once in a while not being able to do that. And if a student is consistently doing it, they're probably not really in the A range anyways. You're not having a lot of students who are missing a ton of work and then complaining that they're not getting an A, is kind of like where my head's at here. So while I'm kind of along this line of discussion right now, I wanted to pose two reflection questions for this episode. One is, what do the students need to know on the way into class? And by the way, that is a question that implies that you need to limit that thing as much as possible. What we need to think about is what do they really need to know? There may be 8 things you want them to know, but are there 2 or 3 that they have to know? Those are the ones that I would really focus on. And the second reflection question is maybe even more important, as I said, is what does a student in your class do if they haven't done the work? How does the system that you've set up inform those choices on their part? Okay, let's move on to level 2 questions. Level 2 questions are questions that are designed to elicit implicit answers. Answers that are interpretive of the text and yet still grounded in the text. Level 2 answers are ones that students might reasonably be expected to know, but that doesn't necessarily mean they would know them. They might have like an idea about the answer after reading the text, and those answers would really vary amongst the students. Differences in interpretation, different understandings of an author's meaning, different impressions of where the heart of a piece is. None of these are very far from the text, and yet all of them are fodder for exploration of the text. All of them also offer discussants the chance to express their own ideas and to explore their teammates' ideas. Honestly, I think in some ways, level 2 questions are the toughest for students to ask and answer. And so what you'll see sometimes is discussion teams, especially at the beginning of the year, getting the level 1 work done and then skipping immediately to the kind of the more fun and free level 3 questions and discussions. And unfortunately, as I'll talk about and as we'll see, skipping that level 2 zone can really make for kind of an unbalanced discussion. And what you'll see as your discussion teams evolve in the second and thirds of the year is that a really productive, successful discussion team will spend time in each of the 3 levels. Now, honestly, that said, the real heart of the discussion and kind of where students want to get to is really level 3 territory. Level 3 questions are designed to elicit answers that go beyond and sometimes well beyond the text. They can be creative, probing, analytical, and maybe some combination of all those and more. They can relate to other concepts discussed in our class previously. They can relate to family, to friends, to dreams, to philosophies, to a movie, to a television show. They sometimes have many answers and sometimes no answers at all. Kind of one of the guiding bottom lines of level 3 questions is that students should create level 3 questions that they themselves would want to talk about and that brings energy to them. I guess another way of thinking about level 3 questions is that if a passerby happened to pop into your classroom, that passerby might need to hang out for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes or longer to even have any idea how the discussion that the team is having originated from whatever content originated from. But I would guarantee you that when that passerby dropped in, they would sense from the students an energy that would be really engaging. Level 3 questions are really empowering students to approach the material really in their own way and with their kind of own fingerprints all over what they think is worthwhile. So let me ask 2 related reflection questions. Number 1, are students getting to create questions in your course? Which is really important. But maybe even more important is, do the students' questions drive the discourse? It's one thing for students to ask questions, but are those just kind of performative or perfunctory skills that we're training, or do those questions actually manifest in driving the discourse of the class? Maybe it's this last area that really defines the student-generated classroom from like the student-centered classroom. So as I said, I introduced the levels of questions process pretty early on in week one. And usually I do so using a very simple text with which the students are familiar. I kind of like Cinderella for this because there's a lot of whacked out stuff in that story. So basically, I'll kind of throw the concept of levels of questions at them and I'll write on the board. And then I'll ask a student to tell the story of Cinderella in 1 minute. And I tell all the students that the story they're about to hear in 1 minute, that's the text. After we receive the text from the brave storyteller person, we are going to practice using these levels of questions that I wrote on the board. So typically we'll hear level 1 questions along the lines of, you might imagine, what was the slipper made of? And what time did she have to be home? And again, I emphasize, everyone should have the same answers. Everyone should be able to have put their finger on the text. Also, typically, when we move on to level 2 questions, the students will be a little more tentative. And honestly, this is fine. This is to be expected. They're kind of getting used to this process. So typically, we'll hear a question like, was Cinderella happy in her situation with the stepsisters? And since the text from the original storyteller didn't say Cinderella was unhappy, then that really does fall into the level 2 question territory because the answers are interpretive, although they're probably similar. And also, typically, as you move on to level 3 questions, the questions might be a little more in the box than we would prefer. As far as the students are concerned, what is the significance of the fairy godmother is, a decent level 3 question. But what these level 3 questions also have is a little bit of a hint of the students asking questions that they think I want to hear. So they're fine level 3 questions. I'm not exactly sure the students are super interested in those two things, but given time and the opportunity to play with level 3 questions, the level 3 questions will probably pick up steam and pick up edge and honestly become a little more playful. I think in general, what we're trying to do here with level 3 questions is detrain them from asking questions in which they sound like teachers. And then eventually you'll hear some kind of fun questions. Like I remember one kid asking, what if Cinderella wants to go to law school and get a law degree and she gets a little bored with being the princess? Like, how are the gender relations between her and the prince going to work out in this regard? One student wondering whether it was problematic that she wanted to be Cinderella. As you can see, these questions become kind of more fun, a little more playful, a little more provocative, and maybe a little more personal. It's also a good idea, I think, if the students are having difficulty kind of being rangy with their level 3 questions, to ask them to switch perspectives in creating level 3 questions. Like, okay, now ask a level 3 question from the perspective of the prince. And it just goes on and on from here. So creating questions, level 1, level 2, and level 3 questions, after applying them to Cinderella, becomes just a foundational element of the class. And the more they're asked to create questions, and the more they're asked to hear their teammates' questions, and the more they're required and offered the opportunity to answer those questions, the more we're increasing their capacity to ask probing, analytical, incisive, and authentic, generative questions. So again, these 3 levels of questions really are vital to the functioning of the discussion class going forward. Eventually, even, I introduce a few different discussion jobs. One of these jobs, which was actually devised and explained to me by a super brilliant discussion-based teacher named Trevor Thornton, is the level tracker. The level tracker's job is to actually get up from the discussion team and spend the discussion at the board tracking the levels of the discussion. So on the y-axis, the student has level 1, level 2, level 3, and on the x-axis, the student has time and is actually making a real-time plot of where the discussion is hovering. And in an ideal or healthy discussion, the level tracker might end up with a plot that looks somewhat like a sine curve. And as I told you, normally at the beginning of the year, the plot's going to be a little bottom heavy and pass quickly through level 2 land and kind of hover at level 3 land. And again, one of the many benefits of the level tracker is that they're both a real-time feedback vessel. And then at the end of the discussion, the level tracker really has a nice bird's eye view of the discussion and can give some helpful feedback. So really at the end of the day, the level tracker has some opportunities to do some summative work for the team and really some assessing work for the team. And what you'll find a lot of times, at least in my class, is that the richest part of the discussions are not only in level 3 territory, but sometimes like in level 3+ territory. And I think this is something really important for us discussion-based teachers to think about. So I pose this last reflection question here. How far beyond the text are you comfortable with? For me, while it's super important that the level 1 work is done, I really like allowing students a real range to go very well beyond the text. But I would also say I'm probably more comfortable with more rangy discussions. And that's important for, I think, all of us to assess. Well, that's about it on levels of questions. So now you understand two really crucial foundational skills that are really important to my discussion-based class: AAA discussion notes and the 3 levels of questions. So again, this has been Discussion-Based Teaching Explained, episode number 9, the 3 levels of questions. I'm Adam. If you have any questions, please email me at discussionbasedteaching@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.